Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Dash Zero, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and Red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage. Today, my guest is Andrew Mallaband. Andrew is the founder of Breakthrough Moments, where he advises tech companies on growth, engineering, messaging, and go-to-market strategies. Previously, he has helped build industry leaders like Turbonomic and Opalus from the ground up, leading to access to EMC, Microsoft, and that's something we have in common, to IBM.
Right.
And recently, I read some of your analysis, and I'm really happy to talk about them. Welcome to Code Red, Andrew.
Thank you, Mirko. So it's a pleasure to be here.
I always start with my first question at Code Red. I always ask about your biggest Code Red moment, which essentially is what happened to you in your major outage or oh no moment, right? And how did maybe one of the tools like Turbonomic, which was not so much a troubleshooting tool, right? But maybe you had these moments where the tool helped you, maybe even the AI helped you to solve a problem.
I personally, in my career, did not spend a lot of time on the front line. I spent a lot of time interviewing customers about, what their challenges were. But my own code red moments, I guess they were more related to the businesses that I was working for. We were trying to close the quarter end. One year it was Christmas. We were trying to close this massive deal at Cable and Wireless. It would double the revenue of the company I was working for. And my wife made me go and live in a hotel between Christmas and New Year, because she couldn't stand, the pressure. And, I was supposed to be there with my family, but I was completely vacant. So that was my biggest code red moment that I remember in my career.
It's a good one. And by the way, not a lot of people, I work a lot in the go-to-market space, know that. I had my former CRO give me the advice to always send my wife at the end of the quarter into holidays somewhere. Because the last week, whoever has been in these situations where there is this large deal that is not allowed to slip, and you need to get it, the pressure is really tremendous, right? I mean, and you get stressed out, and also if you win it, it's a really nice feeling, right? But it is stressful. So I can relate to that code red moment, and probably no AI and observability tool can help you here.
Right. Yeah. So I guess my other code red moment was, again, it was kind of related to the intensity of the business. We had a year, I think it was the third year at Turbonomic, where, we were pioneering a business model where we were doing inside selling as the primary model. And I was the guinea pig for enterprise selling, which incidentally eventually became how we went to market. In 12 months, we, with a very small team, we closed over 50 deals in the enterprise space. And, we were like half the revenue of the company. And at the end of that year, we'd worked so hard, I burnt out, right? So that was a code red moment for me. And it got me into meditation and mindfulness and all these things, and looking after myself as well, because I've been running hard and I wasn't doing any of that.
Yeah, I get that. Today is my 49th birthday, by the way. And it changes a lot, right? Over time. When you're younger, you can do that differently, but after a while, you have to be more careful, right? With everything, mindful, do some workouts and stuff like that. But getting to your observability in 2025, right?
Yeah, to provide some context, I've worked for two companies particularly who were focused on AI over a 16-year period. And I got the opportunity to come back and revisit this area of observability and AI 18 months ago, when a new vendor basically asked me to get involved. And it gave me the opportunity to get exposure to, many, many customers across the world who were involved in deploying observability solutions. And there were really kind of four themes that came out of those conversations. Cost. So, my bills are increasing in an unexpected ways. How do I control that? Data deluge. I mean, that's part of the reason for the cost, I think. And so many organizations were overwhelmed with data, and trying to make sense of it was a problem. And the consequences of that was the impact on productivity, because people were spending a lot of time in incident management processes and doing postmortems on incidents, trying to figure out why. Obviously, that's stealing time from other activities, which it affects the delivery of new capabilities. And then the final area was around data observability. So more and more companies are running real-time applications, for personalizing user experiences, recommendation engines, fraud detection, cybersecurity, supply chain management. And in all of these situations, data freshness and data integrity are absolutely critical. Right? Things fall down like a pack of cards if you don't have alignment there. So scratching below the surface of all of these things, there was really one consistent theme that I observed, which I think is letting people down, and that's that a lot of organizations don't actually have a strong data strategy that underpins observability. I was motivated by these findings really to write this Observability 2025 series, which digs into these challenges, and it talks about how we might go about solving some of these problems.
I really liked it. It's a really good read. I can just encourage people to read it. I love it because, I mean, as you probably know, we have built Dash Zero around a few of these observations you have done. And one of the observations we also hear, and I would love to dig into that a little bit, is the cost problem, right? I mean, we hear it all the time that people, they need observability, but it's really expensive. And one of the reasons for that is that you pay for the data that you are sending, and there's a lot of data, and there's even more data all the time with microservice applications, clouds, new things coming up.
Right.
And not only the cost, but you mentioned it, because if you have a lot of data and you're trying to find the needle in the haystack, and your haystack is just so much bigger now, doesn't make finding the needle easier, right? So it
It does.
takes more time.
And I think these things are only going to compound as well, because we've now got these things called agents that we're going to manage, and there's a whole new dimension of things that we need to start looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just the whole vibe coding, right? Which will let developers create at least code much faster. And
Mhm.
that means there will be more code deployed probably into production. Also code that is not so much controlled by the developer. So it's a little bit more unknown code, right? So this is also interesting. I don't even know what the challenge will be, but I can imagine that based on my personal experience, always easier to analyze and troubleshoot your own code,
Mhm.
right? Because you have written it. But now you are essentially troubleshooting code that's written by an AI, right? Maybe controlled by you or supervised by you, but it's still not your code anymore. I mean, again, you will get more data, but also more unknown data that is not that familiar with you.
Yeah,
And
you may
uh,
get more failures as well.
yeah, absolutely. So this will be very interesting. And we see the same, right? We see that it's more and more data. People are struggling to make sense out of the data, and it's getting more expensive, right? So I've seen the charts on, right? Data is going up, value is going down, right? And at the same time, because with more data doesn't come more value if you can't make sense out of it anymore.
That's right. And I think that, I mean, there are some technological things that you can do, but I think it was in the fourth article in my series, I wrote about observability and business value. And one of the things that I said in there was, you've got to really start by defining what your intent is. I spoke to so many people who they couldn't answer the question of, what are you collecting and why? They were more focusing on, well, I need a tool, and I'm going to go and discover things and collect the data and build some dashboards, but they weren't really thinking about the intent. And in my mind, that is, well, what are the business transactions that actually matter? to the business. And that could be user interactions, it could be data pipelines. If these break, then they're obviously going to have a business impact, and that's really where people should start, rather than trying to just discover the universe of everything and collect all this data. Now, in doing that as well, I also suggested that the most important signal that we need to focus on is distributed tracing as well, because that helps us to actually understand the dependencies, and inherently it actually contains causality. We can see how,
Yeah.
when a problem arises, how it propagates through the system. We don't get those clues by looking at metrics and logs. They're kind of the things that you need to zoom in on once you understand the causality in the environment, right? Because they'll reveal more interesting details about what it is that we need to do to try and diagnose the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would love to talk about two of the dimension because we are also talking about it internally. I would like to first start with the data that's sent in, and you said it's not intentionally. I had this discussion today on a LinkedIn thread where I was saying what, in my point of view, is one of the problems that most of the data you send to observability tools is not coming from your developers at all.
Right.
Most of the data is coming from third parties, right? And you're just integrating. You have all these plugins. Oh, there's a plugin for this technology, let's say Oracle database. And now I'm getting all the logs and metrics of the Oracle database. And then I'm adding getting my AWS account, and there are 50 AWS services. Now getting all the metrics and logs from AWS services, which is not the data I have added to my code. It's just data from third party. And it's very hard to understand, what do I really need, right? Where's the data coming from? I can't even control the data. So I think that's part of the problem, that most of the data you send into observability tools is it's not your data, right? You are collecting information, telemetry from third-party tools and services, and then you try to combine that with your application data that is relying on those services, right?
Yeah, I think we've got to ask why. Why am I doing? That's the fundamental thing that we need to, what value is this going to add?
Absolutely.
That's something that people need to do. And I think if they ask themselves that question, then they will probably find that they collect a lot less data than they are today, which I think it will have an impact on the cost, and it will also um, it will give more clarity to the people who use these systems as well, right? Because they'll be dealing with less noise.
No, absolutely. And then the other point was tracing. I can't even agree more with you. But here is also the reality from 25 years. So I saw tracing the first time 25 years ago with Wiley Introscope. Wiley had tracing for Java applications, and I was totally intrigued. I loved it, right? And then I work with other tools like Dynatrace, PurePath, right? App Dynamics, Business Transactions. So tracing is there forever. But even today, I see that most even developers, they rely much more on logs and metrics still. And I haven't figured out why, to be honest, in 25 years, because I'm such a big fan of tracing, but I still see it even today with Dash Zero. When I see I always look at the ingest and what's ingested, how much tracing, how much logs, how much metrics. Tracing is always the third thing people do, right? It's always kind of logs and metrics. Sometimes it's metrics first. You create some dashboards, and then you add logs for your debugging logs and stuff like that. But then tracing, which adds, as you said, right, it adds the context, it gives causality, it lets you understand interaction, and maybe even if an error occurs, who is affected, right? It gives you blast radius.
We used to call it
Yeah,
service management, right? When we had tools like Mercury back in
yeah.
the day, right? And
Topaz,
yeah,
Topaz.
yeah.
Yeah,
And that, I guess, that was part of the intent of Dynatrace. I mean, if you look at the way services are being constructed today, not only do you have lots of distributed components, lots of microservices, but you also have this organizational decomposition as well, where you've got lots of different teams who manage a piece of the puzzle. So I don't know, maybe developers care less about the end to end, which is really what distributed tracing is about. I think this is very relevant from an SRE perspective, though, because they're trying to piece together all of these components to figure out, why. when things break. If I'm responsible for a piece in the machine, then I'm less interested about the end to end.
I really remember very early Dynatrace days, Bernd Greifeld, the founder, there was only PurePass, right? There was no metrics, nothing in Dynatrace. I remember him saying, I will never build dashboards, right? That was until version 3 when he had dashboards in, right? Because people demanded it. I was the same with Instana, right? I wanted tracing, and I said, oh no, tracing is the most important thing. But then customers, if you hit reality, the reality is just, and then you saw like a Datadog, they only had dashboards, and we said, oh, dashboards, they are not so useful for developers. They need tracing. But then you saw them taking off with dashboarding and metrics at the beginning, and then they added logs, by the way, and then tracing. So
Yeah,
they did it kind of the right way from a customer perspective, and I did it the wrong way. I started with tracing, right, because I was so intrigued, and so I learned my lesson that tracing, yes, I think it's the most powerful thing in observability, right? And it gives everything you need, especially context. It helps you with troubleshooting so much. But until today, I still think it is not the most loved.
right. Well, I think here's the thing: if you want to go anywhere with all these SAI SRE tooling, you need it, right? Because what these vendors are attempting to do is to build, the graphs of the environment in order to basically represent dependencies. Because the idea of them is that when something breaks, they have this knowledge base that shows the dependencies in the environment, and they have an algorithm which traverses the dependencies, and it carries out various diagnostic tests. There's no way to build those graphs without distributed tracing, from what I can see.
I agree. I agree. Just the customers do not always agree, right? That's the
Yeah,
point,
I
right?
mean, but I saw this because, I spent, more than a year talking to customers about AI SRE toolings on behalf of a vendor that I was working with. And one of the biggest challenges of actually demonstrating any value to a customer um, was the fact that people didn't have this, right? And so you would go along, you would install the product, and having set the expectation that you were going to do all this magic for the customer, but the magic never happened because the customer didn't have the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something people need to understand even with AI, right? Causality is really important, right? And you need that because otherwise, and at my former CTO at Insana always said, if you have only metrics, at some point everything correlates with everything, right?
Right. Yep.
Somehow. And if you don't have the causality, if you don't have the graph and
Yep.
dependencies, it's very hard to understand if this metric here on the left and that on the right, even
Yeah.
if they seem to have a correlation, is there a dependency, right?
Mm,
That's
yeah.
that's very
Unfortunately,
hard to
Harry Potter doesn't work in observability space. So, there's gonna be no magic here. There's no
no,
magic answer. So,
no, absolutely. And we also discuss internally. So today we have tracing and spans, but we are discussing this notion of business transaction. And I totally agree. That should be one of your main things you should care about, right? The call it user journey or business transaction, whatever. It is not that easy how you map that to tracing, in my point of view, right? Sometimes a business transaction is just a distributed trace, but sometimes it could be multiple traces that are a business transaction, especially depending on the way you do your application, right? And that's kind of making it really interesting. And at the moment, we are figuring out, for example, if AI can help us identify those business transactions for you, so that you don't have to configure them, because I think configuring them is complicated.
right. One of the other things that I also observed is that a lot of organizations have a separate team of people called customer experience, customer service, who are facing off to customers. And they're using digital experience tools, from Adobe and people like that, that monitor the customer experience. And the customer experience could be bad because of the design of the software, right? It's just a poor user experience. It could be that the customer, hasn't been trained properly. It could be that the issue is actually a systems issue, right? And so I also think trying to bring together digital experience with observability is also an opportunity as well.
Oh, totally. And there's also a whole category called product analytics, right?
Yeah.
Like which is essentially mostly from product management, but it does the same, right? Uh, I was talking to a larger enterprise in the Netherlands, and the CTO there, he was saying, "Hey, I pay this amount of money. It was all, by the way, seven figure, right? All more than $1 million. I pay $1 million plus for this user experience here. I pay $1
Yeah.
million plus for my amplitude. I pay $1 million plus for my Datadog, and I
Well,
pay $1 million plus for my Splunk for SIEM. And essentially, it's all the same data, right? And how can you help me with that, right? And I was like, huh. It makes sense, right? It makes sense that you have all these different use cases for different personas who have different tools, and essentially it's all the same data, more or less, right?
then we have digital adoption platforms as well. There's what I would consider observability data in those. They give us another lens on what users are doing, and we've got data observability as well, which is again, it's the Monte Carlos of this world. I mean, I wrote an article recently. I quoted a guy called Heinrich Hartmann in there, who is the head of SRE at Zalando. I did actually speak to him on several occasions in the past as well, and one of his biggest gaps was how do I solve data integrity challenges in the environment. Um, when we think about the observability space, we're often looking at it from a performance perspective and not a data integrity perspective.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah,
from an SRE perspective, you can't really differentiate. If there's a problem, there's a problem. You need to bring that into this world for the SRE as well.
absolutely. Yeah, you have tools like Monte Carlo, right,
Yeah.
for those type of challenges. Absolutely. Yeah, but let's talk about. I mean, we were talking a little bit about AI and SRE agents. What is your definition of an SRE agent, and what would you say is the state of the market products, if you can, because you have written about it? I would be curious about that.
I guess it's a fairly broad definition, right? That there are tools out there that are doing what I would have defined, from my past as runbook automation capabilities, where they're basically taking housekeeping work off, um, the SRE team, stuff that they would like to be able to automate that they haven't yet, and it's fairly easy and simple stuff to do. I mean, there's a company called Runwen who are doing a great job at that. And they kind of started off as a runbook automation vendor around Kubernetes, and they've kind of evolved from there. Um, and then you have other players who are trying to automate the incident management process as well. Yeah, I mean, it's distinctly different from the housekeeping. So, when I get an issue, help me to uh, try and diagnose what it is, and provide me with all the information, so I don't have that overhead. I can do it faster. I can get to the root cause quicker, and hopefully recover the service faster as well. And there seems to be a new company in that space every day of the week. There's a lot of people focusing on that. Microsoft are in the game as of a few weeks ago. They've announced that they have a capability there. Incident IO, who were kind of formerly in the PagerDuty space, the CEO there said on LinkedIn the other day that they're now going to move in on that space as well. You've also got companies like Causally, Dynatrace. There's a company called Nofire AI, who are a new company who are trying to focus specifically on how to do causal reasoning, which is distinctive from many of these other vendors who are really focusing on how do I correlate data through a knowledge graph. Um, it's kind of yet to be seen, I would say. I mean, I use the term nascent in my article because I think there's very little significant evidence about how quickly these vendors are making progress. I mean, part of the reason there is that it takes a long time to bake AI, right? You need a lot of runtime experience to refine it. I mean, when we did Turbonomic, we purposely went to market with a product which was focusing on reporting and capacity planning rather than real-time decisioning and resource allocation, which was the fundamental, premise of the product. Because we could put stuff in the marketplace, we would actually gain knowledge because we had the data and we could run our algorithms against live production data and actually see what results we were getting and refine the AI, right? And we could do that in a way that wasn't intrusive to the customer. A lot of these companies don't have that, or, they don't have that luxury because they're building off synthetic data, which isn't necessarily representative. So, until you've got a lot of customer, I mean, you maybe it's something for you to consider, Mirko. You've got 160 customers, and I guess that's a big opportunity,
Yeah.
really, to think about how to refine how you're using AI. I mean, it took several years, right? And we went through the same experience at Smarts as well, which was another company I worked at in the network management space. Again, there it took time, and I think that's the reality of where we are with this. And the other challenge that I think a lot of these vendors have, again, is the data. If you don't have the right data in place, then you're not going to be able to produce the results. So I think it goes back to you need a foundation in order to build on, which it includes your strategy about the intent that you're going to follow, right? What data am I collecting and why? You need telemetry pipelines which are able to shape the data. I think you need to have a way to store it cost effectively as well, right? Which is where data lakes come in. Yeah, because we are going to have a data explosion. Things like ClickHouse, are very important technologies in that regard because they change the economics of actually storing and accessing the data as well. So, many companies have got to get those things right, I think, in order to exploit the benefits that AI can give them.
No, absolutely. I mean, we are having an internal project called Agent Zero, which is our agentic approach. And I have to say, I was pretty skeptical. And we built an MCP server, what you do right around it, and had to figure out what to expose and how to expose it, which functionality. And today we have an agent that does troubleshooting, right? So if an alert pops up, you can click a button and then the agent autonomously connects, reads the message, and then connects and tries to figure out the root cause. And it's mind-blowing. I was actually shocked how good it is. And it's not that to be very transparent here, there's no real IP because we are just using Claude as a model and use an agent and then connect to the MCP. And then you have to figure out what data and how to describe it and which functionality to expose. But then it does everything without any guidance from us, right? And the result is really, really good. So I would say it's really on the level of a very experienced troubleshooting person. I mean, I did troubleshooting 10, 15 years of my life when we have different scenarios in the hotel demo application where we tested it with real data, and also inside of our application where I would say I would get there in an hour or two and the thing get there in 5 minutes. I mean, we have to test it more and figure out, and pricing is a topic, right? How do you use that? It's also expensive, and it comes without any kind of usage of some hardcore machine learning or I mean, you essentially need no AI skill set to use that, right? Which is really interesting because before that, causality, machine learning, you needed really, really hardcore people to do that. And now you just use a model, and the result is really the best I've ever seen in the observability space, right?
Right, but I think what data you actually feed this is actually very important.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think the luxury that you have is that you're building a platform that provides a foundation for that.
I also think that open telemetry in this regards is a benefit because it's well documented, right? I mean, these models get trained on publicly available data, essentially. I mean, you can feed more data into it, but you have the semantic convention, so all the fields are properly documented. So the AI actually understands what HTTP dot status underscore code means, right? And then it gets a reference to what the actual meaning of the fields are, what the 500 is, what the 404 is, right? And all that data is kind of there. And then if you use that and you provide the LLM with that data and it understands that this is open telemetry, I think that also has benefits, right? Because now you can benefit from all the publicly available documentation and everything,
Mhm.
and use that for the troubleshooting process.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see what your results it produces.
I will show you. I can show you. It's really down to saying, hey, this problem here is call of this service, this method with that parameters, and here are suggested fixes, right? And now, by the way, you can also connect that to your Cursor or whatever AI coding tool now, because they allow you to connect to MCP servers. And now you can combine that, and you could essentially say in your IDE, a developer could say, optimize the performance of this service, and it will use this MCP server to connect to Dash Zero, get the real-time data of that service, and then use that information to optimize the code, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of pretty interesting use cases that will evolve, in my point of view, where observability systems will also feed into these coding platforms.
I think there's another one as well, which is, and I've kind of been talking to vendors about this for a little while now about, you know, at the end of the day, if we're missing telemetry, why not have capabilities where we can actually discover what the gaps are, and then based on those gaps, actually have AI write the instrumentation that's required, and create a closed loop around that, and shift left here so that you're actually building the instrumentation. Because one of the big issues here is, it takes time and effort to instrument code, right? And that is often at the expense of features. You might get resistance from development teams and product managers. So why not find a way to actually do that in software?
Yeah, absolutely. I would ask you, because you are talking to so many clients, what are they seeing and what keep them up at night when they think about observability monitoring and AI and the future of the platform? Are they really into agents yet, or are they still struggling with the initial problems we were discussing, cost, data? Is the problem really AI, or do they think that this will solve that problem, or how do you
Well,
see?
I think there's a cycle, right? People like AI, the story around AI, because it sounds great, right? It's compelling. Everybody wants to have it. But then you have the reality of, the data gap that people have. People do not have all of the data that they need. So when reality hits, I think I'm finding that people are now kind of looking more at the foundational things that they need to do, because otherwise they'll never be able to exploit the benefits of AI. Cost is clearly a major challenge. But again, I think if you look at the data problem and you look at the foundational aspects of what you're doing, you can also solve that problem as well. So fix the data strategy and you solve two problems in one hit: cost and AI.
Yeah, that makes sense. Andrew, was really nice conversation. Uh, Good chatting with someone who has been in this space for a while, right? Understands the issues. And yeah, thank you for joining Code Red.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by Dash Zero. We make observability easy for every developer.